Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace with my co-host, but never partner, Aaron McIntire. Good to see you, my friend. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got preseason football kicking off this week. It's about to say August on the calendar. I mean, it's basically football season. And if that wasn't enough for you, we just had Big Ten Media Days, which is kind of the unofficial kickoff of the year. Here's kind of the big 5 things, Aaron, that stood out to me from the proceedings in Las Vegas and why they were there. No one really knows. Lots of coaches complain. What was the point of this? Lots of media did not go because it was too expensive to attend compared to Indianapolis. So hopefully that's just a runoff. But one place where they are embracing the expectations is Penn State. I made sure I listened to a coach interview or player interview for all of the schools, all right, on at least either the Big Ten Media Days themselves or interviews they did on various podcasts and networks. It was very clear hearing several different players from Drew Aller to offensive linemen to James Franklin himself. Penn State is not running away from this. They want the smoke. They're openly making the comparisons to what Ohio State did last year, Michigan did the year before. The last 2 national championships, a very similar formula. Use a lot of NIL money to bring back your second and third day NFL draft picks for one last, run for the roses. Have a backfield where 2 stud running backs can share the load, like Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards at Michigan. And then you had an even better one, I would argue, in Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins last year. Now you got Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton at Penn State, right? Because you may go 16 games. You want to make sure that star running back is fresh. And both teams also kind of had weak schedules most of the year and then some huge games towards the end. Penn State, again, very similar formula. They're trying to emulate it. Had the Big Ten go 3 for 3 in the last 3 years in the college football playoff. They are not running from the expectations, Aaron.
Nope, this is the attitude you have to take into a season like this, though, isn't it? I mean, you have to come into this with a supreme amount of confidence, maybe even a little bit of arrogance. It kind of reminds me, I think Rush Limbaugh, one of the people that we have looked up to in our day jobs, always talked about the job of, doing his job every day, day in and day out for years. There has to be a little bit of an arrogance that comes about it, a healthy arrogance, if that's even possible. And I think you have to take that into this year. There's no false sense of humility. When you know you're as talented as you are, the danger, of course, becomes having those, welcoming that smoke, as you said, having that kind of morph into this sense of entitlement. I just remember Chris Childers on Sirius XM has brought this up several times in the last year, going to ACC Media Days last year and talking to Florida State and asking them about Georgia Tech playing that kickoff game in Dublin. And he just said it stood out to him that none of the Florida State players were really taking Georgia Tech that seriously. And of course, I think Florida State was in the top 10 then, and they just fell flat on their face in national television, first game of the year. We all remember how that went. But I didn't get that sense out of Penn State. And I didn't get a sense of the quiet confidence around Kinnick Stadium that you and John Miller, the former co-host of the show, used to talk about every single offseason. I just saw a lot of confidence and a lot of understanding what the expectations are. And just the understanding we have to, it's now or never, it's do or die. We got to live up to that. So I think that's the attitude you got to take into a season like this.
And listen, Penn State's one of the great programs in the history of the sports. And we say now or never, whether it's us or other people saying
for this squad.
Yeah, for this era, for the James Franklin era, we're not talking forever, okay? But if Franklin can't get it done this year with Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon all breaking in new quarterbacks at the exact same time, okay, then you really struggle to see how, as it's currently constructed, maybe is a good qualifier to put on it. As it is currently constructed, you just fail. It's really hard to see if they can't do it this year, then in what year, as it is currently constructed, do you think Penn State could do it? All right, that brings us to topic 2. We talked a little bit about this last week here, but it came up quite a bit at Big Ten Media Days, and it's very clear the Big Ten is digging in its heels on a potential new college football playoff format. Commissioner Tony Petitti made it very clear you're not getting the Big Ten support on any format that grants more power and sway to a selection committee. The Big Ten definitely wants to be able to play in. He also said something that surprised me. Because I've often wondered if this was really, Aaron, just to, a ploy to get the SEC to go to 9 games. But he said that's really not as much of a concern to us as you people think. Conferences can do their own thing, and no matter how many conference games you're going to play, you're going to have unbalanced schedules and teams that have advantages over other teams in the conference with who they play and who they do not. It really comes down to the Big Ten made it very clear through Commissioner Petitti. It really does not want the selection committee picking 11 of the 16 teams in a college football playoff and then seeding them as well. They want to take power away from the committee. And then I also think the former TV executive, Tony Petitti, also is thinking about how many more pivotal games you'll have down the stretch with so many more teams still thinking they're in it. And then that championship weekend when you've got 1 versus 2 and 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 as potential play-in games in the Big Ten and the SEC. So this was very adamant. The league's messaging on this from the head man, the commissioner, to the head coaches was pretty singularly focused. They are digging in their heels and not giving in on this. Your thoughts?
We've already talked about this, and I did think it was interesting amongst the coaches. You kind of you mentioned this as well. It was pretty unanimous amongst the coaches. We like this idea. We love this idea. Let's get on with this idea. And they have been absolutely shellacked by the broader college football world for this idea, especially the SEC bros. And that's kind of the part of this that really sticks out to me the most. The SEC defenders. I don't know how much you've consumed of this or how much you've heard this, but I've heard it posited multiple times from the SEC bro side of things that we gotta figure this. You gotta earn all this stuff on the field. No such thing as automatic qualifiers. I've also heard it posited as well on multiple occasions from multiple people. Well, when you go back and look at it, the selection committee has actually done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
It's just like, really, we're going with the selection committee has done a great job and. Yeah, sure, they're constrained by the format that they were given, yada, yada, yada. But that's not what anybody has said for the last however many years, almost going on a decade now that we've had the college football playoff. So I don't think this is going anywhere now, the automatic qualifiers. I think it's a non-starter for the SEC, which is what really matters. And I think this lends credence to your prediction that this is not going to be the final year of the 12-team playoff. I was a little bit iffy about that prediction when you laid that out a couple of weeks or last week on Michigan podcast. I was a little bit iffy about that because we've still got, a couple of months, 2, 3, 4 months before we've got to make a decision. But the immediate and hard resistance to the idea of automatic qualifiers seems to me like they're at an impasse. So I don't know how they're going to agree to expand the playoff unless one of those two thresholds, either automatic qualifiers or SEC goes to 9 games. And it seems like there's zero appetite for either side, depending on where you're coming from.
I just don't know what the Big Ten's incentive is.
There's no
to agree to a format that grants more sway over the committee, which is more sway by ESPN. Let's just be honest, and that's the SEC. And money, maybe, I guess, but the Big Ten. If the Big Ten needs money that bad, then just go to 10 conference games and keep all that money between yourselves and Fox, and don't have to split it with anybody, right? I mean, if you're Tony Petitti and the Big Ten presidents and ADs, if you need money, what would you rather do? Go to a heavily, swayed by public opinion expansion of the college football playoff where your rival conference controls most of that media. I mean, basically SEC bros, you're basically just talking about ESPN as a network, okay? Do that or just drop a non-conference game and play a 10th conference game. What would you rather do?
Well, if you played a 10th non-conference game, you would have the added benefit, of course, of increased revenue. That's a duh. The second thing is you could just hold that over the SEC's head all the more.
Yeah, we're playing 10 now.
We're playing 10 games, and you're playing 8.
Right.
This is all the more reason we need automatic qualifiers because you guys don't have the same strength of schedule as we do, and that will be true.
Yep.
That will be true. If you're playing 10 games, that's a lot higher strength of schedule than the 8 conference games.
All right, point 3. Lincoln Riley says, by the way, without these automatic bids. Now, listen, I listen to a lot of the media, which is really the SEC bros, and they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. Well, we don't want these non-conference games to go away. We don't want them to go away. We don't want them to go away. But then they actually don't want to go with the format that would 100% ensure they get to stay. All right? And so Lincoln Riley made it pretty clear at USC. Listen, I love the USC-Notre Dame rivalry, but what is the incentive to play that? If we're going to have a selection committee with a subjective process, we don't have any kind of even RPI, strength of schedule metric. We don't really know. They're not really transparent on how they make their decisions. One spokesman comes out every week and it's kind of a retcon of what a narrative is, and they can change on a dime. So then what is the incentive to play those games is what Lincoln Riley is saying. Now, I still think, I'm a competition guy and a rivalry guy. There's incentives beyond the college football playoff for USC and Notre Dame to continue to play. But again, if what we're playing here is a game of leverage, right? Then the idea then, why, if we're having conversations because the SEC conference schedule is so hard that they only get to play 8 games, then why, if you're a Big Ten team, I get that idea. Why play 9 and then add a Notre Dame, then add an Oklahoma like Michigan is, then add an Iowa State like Iowa does every year, and has largely been doing that here in your lifetime during the best era of Iowa State football they've ever had under the last few coaches. What's the incentive to keep doing that then? If the other conference you're really competing with gets to have less conference games and also set up its schedule so the penultimate week of the year they get a third bye week by resting all their guys because they're playing Lamar, Kennesaw State, your mom, every FCS program in the country. Structurally, I don't agree with it from a competitive standpoint, but structurally, I get what Lincoln Riley and many other Big Ten coaches said, and many of them said this, that what was the point of continuing to play these games then if we're going to have a subjective process?
Yeah, so this is to me, it's not so much of a scheduling issue. It's not so much of an automatic qualifier issue. It's not so much of a college football playoff issue. It's just a structural issue with college football right now. All of the worst things are being incentivized, and all the worst things are being incentivized, and all the best things that we used to like about this sport are being de-incentivized. That's rife everywhere, and you could apply. It's not just specific to college football. You could apply this to a lot of areas of modern society. That what you incentivize, you'll get more of. That's what you de-incentivize, you'll get less of. Ironclad law of the universe. But this is more of just a structural issue. Because I understand if you're coming at it from a coach's perspective, why in the world would you make life harder on yourself if there's not going to be a reward at the end? Other than, hey, just the love of the game. But do you see... They say, oh, hey, we love this game, but do you see when the product on the field, which is the players, they're making business decisions right and left. We're not playing for the love of the game anymore, and that's the biggest problem. And you're gonna see that crop up in areas like this more and more often.
All right, 4, back to Tony Petitti. Word came out, fascinating that it came out right before he spoke to the media, which makes you think he's the leak. Or his office is the leak, but the word leaked out that Petitti has now, if you go back to the Committee on Infractions hearing that the University of Michigan had, it's not a sign stealing scandal again. There's nothing against stealing signs. It's an in-person scouting scandal, all right, whether or not that rule was broken. So just to clarify that. But Tony Petitti actually then set essentially a friend of the court brief on behalf of Michigan saying they've been punished enough, time to move on, all right? I have no idea whether it makes any difference or not. This will be the last infractions case the NCAA will ever hear that does not involve player eligibility because the College Sports Commission is taking that over from this time forward. So this is going to be the last one of these. I can see them saying, hey, let's drop the hammer on the way out. Who cares? We're done here anyway. Let's just close the book. It's been 2 years. Move on the way out. But it is interesting because Petitti, remember, 2 years ago, took a very heavy hand in this.
Yep.
Suspended Jim Harbaugh for the rest of the regular season as a result of the controversy over this. So you think this sort of turning of the other cheek matters now or not?
I think this is more about Petitti and Michigan than it is about Michigan and the NCAA because I noticed this last year, but it was repeated again this year. And it's not breaking news when coaches get up there on the podium and thank the commissioner, yada, yada, yada. But this has been 2 years in a row where I've noticed several coaches specifically thank Tony Petitti, not news, but thank him for the basically person-on-person or one-on-one access that they have to him, which is different from the way it was.
And Sharon Moore was one of those this year.
And Sharon was one of those this year who thanked. So I think this is maybe an olive branch from Petitti to Michigan more than it is a serious effort to actually avoid consequence, regardless of whether or not you agree with it for Michigan from the NCAA.
Finally, I thought the coach who made the biggest news was Mike Locksley. In terms of talking about his own team. Lots of coaches, I think, made news talking about the sport in general, which we've already talked about. But in talking about his own team, Mike Locksley, the Maryland coach, flat out admitted, he even used these words, I lost the locker room last year, he said, over NIL and managing guys who were upset about what other guys were making and what they were or were not making. He mentioned there's a new sign up there for camp this year. Hey, leave your Gucci bags, your Louis Vuittons, your Ray-Bans, your car keys I leave those behind when you come in here. We're playing football now. That contract time is over. Basically, it's football time now. I mean, first of all, I want to go back and tell my 2021 self that we're going to be doing a show where it's openly spoken at Big Ten Media Days.
Yeah.
Big Ten Media Days. A coach saying, "Listen, lost my locker room over what guys were getting paid." Okay, I just want to go back and tell that to my 2021 self. But here we are. And it's the first time I can remember a coach specifically anywhere in America admitting that this cost him his own team. It cost him a season. It cost him the locker room, that he mismanaged this. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's something psychological going on here with this specific figure and team. So if you are trying to break a bad habit, or if you're trying to do a lifestyle change, and you constantly, the only thing you think about, okay, don't do this, and it's the same thing, okay? Don't trip. What are you eventually going to do?
Probably trip.
You're
it's
gonna
on
trip.
your head. It's in your mind.
Trip. Yeah, it's in your mind. That which you're trying to, if your mind is set on that which you're trying to avoid, you will become that thing. Whatever your mind is set on, you will become. And Mike Locksley sticks out in my mind as one of the voices early on in the NIL era that was really, really concerned about this exact thing happening to teams. So I wonder if this is just something, you kind of pick up what I'm putting down here, if this is just something he's been so concerned about, and this is like one thing that he's thinking about so much that it actually happened because he's not prioritizing other things. Who knows? It would not surprise me if it was just straight up jealousy and envy within the locker room, tearing that apart. And hey, our season is doomed, and so we don't really have much to play for anyway. And so why not fight about who's getting paid what? But he was one of the voices. I just remember him talking about, I can't play my third string running back at $500,000 or something like that back at the dawn of this era. So I wonder if something psychological is going on.
Is this going to become a built-in excuse for coaches?
I sure hope not.
A deflection.
I sure hope not.
Hey, look at Mike Locksley. Hey, we went to 4 straight bowl games at Maryland. That's never been done before in the history of the program. Okay? We went to 4 straight bowl games. What changed? Oh, well, you guys changed the dynamic, and guys are getting paid. Some guys weren't getting paid. Guys weren't. You see, we had our athletic director left. Remember, the basketball coach made a big deal about that during the tournament last March, right? Okay. So we didn't have our stuff in order, didn't have our stuff together. And is this going to become a new excuse, do you think, for the coaches?
I really hope not, but it is. What did I say a few minutes ago? Whatever you incentivize, you'll get more of. Right. Whatever you de-incentivize, you'll get less of. And coaches now have a new scapegoat. They do, and a scapegoat that they didn't have before. So, of course, you're going to get more of it.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, it'll be time to play Would You Rather. All right, Aaron, time to play Would You Rather. Aaron, let's roll. Let me make you junior program director over there at the Big Ten Network, Aaron. Would you rather join the BTN crew for their annual camp tour yourself, or pick for yourself who on BTN gets to do the tour so you can stay home but make sure you got the best information?
Boy, I'd love to do this, but I don't think people understand how grueling that is. That's why they have different teams.
Yeah, especially now that it's bi-coastal.
Yeah, it's 18. That's 18 days of programming. That's a lot of programming. 18 days of travel. That's a lot of days of travel. 18 days of setup and teardown. That's a huge task. So I think, if we're talking about the actual schedule, so I think one team does half of the stops, the other team does the other half. I think maybe Dave Revson does more than his fair share, if I remember from last year. And by the way, that is starting this Friday, the 1st, if I saw the program guide correctly. The Big Ten bus tour this Friday, starting at Nebraska again. So I would join them. I think that would be fun. I don't think doing all 18 stops would be fun. So if we're doing the actual schedule and programming and talent picking that they do, I would do like half the stops. I think that'd be cool. First one is for you. 2 coaches I thought looked incredibly nervous, sounded incredibly uncomfortable, and for understandable reasons. David Braun and Luke Fickell. Would you rather be Luke Fickell or David Braun going into this fall camp?
I'd rather be David Braun. I mean, Wisconsin's the better job, obviously. And I think Luke Fickell's a good guy. I just think that he made a strategic mistake that he's just never going to recover from. And we've been talking about it on this show since he made it, Aaron. I just remember what I told you, that very first spring game, I watched them try to run that air raid of his. Yeah, in early April, snow and flurries there in Madison, and they didn't have the receivers to run it. And it just reminded me of when Rich Rod came into Michigan and tried to, after 30 years of a, physical, downhill running attack and go now to his, spread option. And all we've got are these pocket quarterbacks we've been recruiting for decades, and we didn't have anybody to run the system, and it just looked ridiculous, and that spilled over to the season, and I worried that was going to happen at Wisconsin, and that turned out to be true. So I just think that he's dug himself a hole, and then the schedule they play this year is among the hardest schedules I've ever seen a Big Ten team get. Not a schedule conducive for the digging out of one's hole. I think Braun is at a school that historically will be more patient, may give him another mulligan because the new state he still doesn't really have a home stadium that opens next year. I could also though see that working against Braun, where I could see Northwestern saying, "All right, man, if we're 3-9 or something again, we got to fill this new stadium. We need excitement.
Let's get excitement.
We got a new name, okay." But that's why I thought about it for a second. I think I'd rather be Braun because I think it's 52-48 that in this situation, Northwestern might show more patience, and he's got a friendlier schedule, although it's not easy either, but it's friendlier than Wisconsin's schedule.
This next one's from you.
All right, would you rather have Iowa's quarterback situation where you're trying to install a transfer, but he missed most of your offseason program, or Michigan State's quarterback situation where you're trying to develop a returning quarterback, but he underwhelmed last season?
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm really excited to see what Mark Gronowski can do, and I understand what you're saying, the comp to Max Brosmer, but I just think there's more experience and a better comprehensive game and better film than Max Brosmer, so I think the ceiling is higher. So I'm really excited for Mark Gronowski, but I think I'd like to go with Childs. That's who I would go with, just because there's already some experience at this level, and I'm still high on him. He was all over he was the duality of man quarterback last season, as I like to say repeatedly, but I still see in him when I watch them play, that dude has a huge ceiling, a really high ceiling. So I just go with him for the experience at this level and the higher ceiling, because Gronowski is done after this year and Childs still has a couple of seasons left. Finally, this one's for you. Would you rather be Nebraska or USC? Pick number 8 and 9 and the de facto Big Ten Media Days poll. So right in the middle of the pack.
Nebraska has the friendlier schedule. I think USC has the better overall talent. They both have very proven head coaches. I think I'll go with I'd rather be USC, just because they're a more powerful brand that has had some lean years here during the same era that Nebraska has as well, and particularly in the post-Pete Carroll era. But they have shown, even when there's a Clay Helton kind of a coach or a Lane Kiffin coach, that they are still capable when they get their act together, even if the coach that they have isn't of Pete Carroll's caliber, they can still win 10 games. And I mean, Nebraska last year was the first time it had even been to a bowl game since 2016. So I think I'd rather be USC. I think USC's overall team in my power ratings is better than Nebraska. I think Nebraska has a better quarterback returning in Dylan Raiola compared to Jade Mayava there at USC. But history has shown the infrastructure still remains in place for USC, that even if the coach is a C, they can still rise up and have really good seasons here or there. And what Nebraska has shown since they abandoned their infrastructure post Frank Solich is that they don't have, they just don't have that in place yet. Maybe that'll change. I guess we'll find out this year. Year 3 is kind of the Matt Rule big year kind of thing in his career. So there you go.
I'm not sure I'm buying. You are correct. That is what everybody points at. I'm not sure I buy that whole cloth, just because the year 3 thing took place in the old era of college football. And I just don't, and at a different level than the Big Ten. So I guess that's why we watch the games. We can find that out as we go. But I see a lot of, well, this is year 3. And I don't know. I think it's kind of apples and oranges. I think the Matt Rule year 3 thing might be out the window. But we'll see.
We'll see. Because they definitely have a schedule where they should at least exceed their 7.5 win total with the schedule they have. That should be a bare minimum is 8-4. We'll see if they get there. We'll come back. We'll wrap things up here in just a moment. Stay tuned. All right, this week's X-Poll results. Who will be this year's Indiana or Illinois surprise team to win double-digit games, meaning a team that was 500 or worse in the regular season the year before and came back and won double-digit games. All right, 42% said Washington, 36% said Nebraska, 13% said UCLA, 11% said Michigan State. What do you think of those results? Whom would you pick?
I voted for Washington. As I laid out last week, I'm high on them. I like Jed Fish. I think their quarterback is going to be great, or at least very serviceable. I still need to see more from UCLA, but I wouldn't, something like that coming out of nowhere and having a good season, but double-digit games, I'm not sure about UCLA. Nebraska, I can't make up my mind on them. And then Michigan State, it just depends on Childs again. Going back to him, can he just become more consistent? And then they could, the sky, as far as it relates to where they have been, the sky is the limit. So I voted for Washington. I'm already very high on them, and that's who passed this vote.
All right, that brings us to our feedback of the week. And listen, Kirk Ferentz is about to become the all-time winningest coach in Big Ten history. And he kind of did it the Hank Aaron way, where Hank Aaron never had a 50 home run season ever. He just had 40 home runs like every single year for like 20 years. All right, so there's no natties, not a lot of 11-win seasons. He had the 1 year where he finished. Would you guys finish number 8 in the final poll like 3 years in a row, right? 02, 03, 04, I think that was. Okay, it's just been consistent success is maybe the right word I would use. Consistent success, not excellence, not mediocrity, just success. Think that's fair too? That's fair too?
Yep. But
OSU 1980, or It Is Time, he wants to remind y'all over there in Hawkeye Nation, as Kirk gets ready to topple Wayne Woodrow Hayes from the top of that coaching victory mountain. Listen, Woody had five natties here, so he's still the greatest. Here's the question. If we did a Big Ten coaches Mount Rushmore, Woody's on it? I think that's definite, that Woody is on it. I think the next 3 names, and this speaks to the history of our league, I think, especially if you're including now USC's history, Nebraska's history, okay? I think we're going to probably say they had to have been a coach in the Big Ten at the time the school was. Fair, let's make that roll, okay? Yeah. So Woody's likeness is clearly on that Mount Rushmore. I think the next 3, all right, you have Bo, who I think is 3rd on the list, second to Woody in Big Ten titles, but never won a Natty. Urban, who had the greatest post-World War II win percentage in the history of the Big Ten. You have, look what Barry Alvarez did at Wisconsin, turning that into a national power. Look what Hayden Fry did, turning Iowa into a national power. You have the Duffy Doherty era at Michigan State, where they were a national power. I think the next 3 names after Woody Hayes, and then Kirk Ferentz as the all-time winningest coach in this league, I think the next 3 names would be pretty hotly debated. I think we'd all agree that Woody is a likeness. And then who the next 3 are, I think there'd be much debate over that.
Yeah, I don't know who is contesting that Woody Hayes is not a better coach than Kirk Ferentz. Have you seen that discourse?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because winningest does not mean better. It is true that Kirk Ferentz, in terms of wins, is better than Woody Hayes. But comprehensively as a coach, you have to use other things to measure that by. It's like talking about quarterbacks in the NFL. When you're measuring greatness, there's a lot of really good quarterbacks. Phillip Rivers never won a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And so that's how he's going to be remembered. I don't think Kirk Ferentz gets on the Mount Rushmore. He's a really, really good coach. You can contextualize this any which way you want to. If you want to go in terms of doing more with less. You're in the Big Ten. How much less is less? But in terms of population centers and trying to develop guys and doing it over a long period of time and a very tumultuous period of time.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to make that your rubric, go right ahead. But ultimately, there's no substitute for national success and being a national power, in my view.
I think some people would make the argument, hey, if Woody doesn't slug that Clemson player in the 78 Gator Bowl, he's probably still coaching another 2 or 3 years and maybe puts this mark out of reach. I'm not so sure about that. He was 65, right? And 65 in 1978 is not the same thing as 65 today.
Yeah.
Okay? But it's an interesting conversation nevertheless. And hey, it's an incredible for someone who was there at the beginning. I mean, I was beginning my sports talk radio career as Kirk Ferentz arrived. And I got a chance to watch him build this thing from the ground up with my own eyes and covered the program very closely. And I mean, I just remember that very first game against that awesome Nebraska team with, Scott Frost and all those tailbacks. And Iowa just looked like a JV squad that very first year. And if you'd have told me that 25 years later, I've moved to multiple different national platforms from, a little podunk sports talk station in Des Moines, and Kirk Ferentz is still at Iowa and is poised to become the winningest coach over Bo, over Woody, over Amos Alonzo Stagg. I mean, it's crazy. Didn't even mention his name, by the way, okay, in terms of a Big Ten Mount Rushmore. It's an incredible testimony to his consistent success at the University of Iowa. So, yeah, I wouldn't put him ahead of Woody Hayes either, but that still means I wouldn't take anything away from what Kirk has done whatsoever either. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, comment, let us know what you think about what we think, and to help us to find more Big Ten fans just like you can also follow us in between episodes at Bigger Ten on X. That's at Bigger Ten on X as well. Until the next time, for Aaron McIntire, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next time right here on Bigger Ten.
Thank you.